What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Welcome to another Thursday night show, gang. Week 9. 9 of these already. Unbelievable how quick this goes. I know I've said that before. I think I was saying that in like week 5, week 6. It's week 9. It was almost a month ago. Crazy. Football season goes by so fast. World Series over. Yankees lose. The Yankees lose. That means there's 102 days. 103 days as of midnight last night, I guess. So 103 till pitchers and catchers. Not a great way to end a baseball season with one of the worst innings I've ever seen. Talked about it a little bit on the basketball show, but we've got a great football slate lined up for tonight, or, well, at least a decent one. Showdown between the Texans and the Jets. Fair enough total. Interesting enough weapons on both sides. Texans at full strength, I feel like this is a much more interesting showdown game. Texans, if you haven't been paying attention, in addition to Nico, who continues to be out, they also lost Steph Diggs to an ACL tear, and he's out for the rest of the year. So that kind of sucks. Takes two big weapons off the board. It would have been a lot more fun if we had 3 fairly prominent skill players on the Jets, 3 fairly prominent receivers on the Texans with Joe Mixon. It's a little bit more limited than it might otherwise have been, but still a lot of working parts on both sides. Should be a lot of viable builds with some downboard players who maybe not we can escape some ownership on. So we'll take a look as usual through all of that. We'll talk about all of the different pieces of the rosters. We'll take a look at some lineup builds. We'll jump into Ace Mind Sim results and we'll give those a look. Andy's here hanging out. What's up, Andy? Quiet chat so far. We had an active basketball show, though. I know everybody's going to be coming back in just a couple minutes. Look like a couple people just walked in the door. Hit the like button down there as you walk in the door. I'll harangue you about the rest of the stuff a little bit later on. But let's dive in. 2-point spread, for one thing. Close, decent expectation of 20-ish points on both sides of this one. Reasonable scoring, but we know how these Thursday night games tend to go. But 42.5 points is not a bad total. 2-point spread, not a bad game. Should be a competitive game environment. As far as the game scripts go for these two teams, Houston's been running the ball just 42% of the time, throwing the ball 57% of the time in a neutral pace, or 57.9% of the time. So it's the 12th most aggressive pass script, but now down a second primary receiver, working with just Tank at the top of the board, Dalton Schultz with his, mediocre output so far this season, if we're being honest about things. And then getting into the John Mechie's, the Xavier Hutchinsons of the world. Might be a day where the Texans lean a little bit harder into Joe Mixon, who already gets ridiculous volume. Mixon leads the way as far as the top projection, including the quarterbacks on both sites today. Looks like an absolute beast at the top of the board. Carried the ball another 25 times last week. He's carried the ball 50 times over the last two games. He's a volume monster and could easily see 30 touches today. So if you just want a who's the easiest guy to roster in the captain, the MVP spot that everybody's going to do that with, it's Joe Mixon. Simple. But getting away from Joe Mixon captain MVP spots is probably the quickest way to gain leverage against the slate and to gain a little bit of ground. You do have 2 capable quarterbacks. As mediocre as Aaron Rodgers has been overall for this season, we're still talking about 35 pass attempts per game, 237 yards total, 6.7 per attempt. It's a limited per attempt number. CJ Stroud on the other side, 7.3 yards per pass attempt. A little bit better, a little bit deeper balls, a little bit more to work with as far as padding some DFS scoring. He's completing 67% of his passes versus the 62% that Rodgers is completing. There's a reason he's the more expensive of the 2 quarterbacks. He's definitely better at this point. He's throwing just 2 balls fewer a game. There's definite upside on both sides in the passing attack. It's just, what does CJ look like now that we're really diminishing that receiver room? Overall, he's thrown 11 touchdowns against just 4 interceptions on the season, 7.5 intended air yards per attempt. Rodgers, 12 touchdowns, but 7 interceptions. He's lost a few along the way. Just completing 3.8 air yards per attempt versus the 4.5 that Stroud has given you. So again, just a little bit further down the field, a little bit better as far as output for DFS purposes. Neither quarterback really a big threat to run with the ball. Stroud runs the ball 2.9 times a game for 3.7 yards per attempt and has not scored on the ground. Aaron Rodgers has run the ball 1.4 times per game for 4 yards per attempt, shockingly, outgaining the younger opponent. But those are just scrambles. There's no design runs. I think there would be a lawsuit involved if they'd called design runs for Aaron Rodgers at this point. As always, kickers, defenses, showdown slate, fire away. Kickers have been heavily involved in showdown scoring this season, more so than, at least as far as I can remember, any recent season. The Jets don't have Zerline. Zerline's on the IR. They signed Riley Patterson, and he's officially going to be the kicker tonight. There was a question mark. They signed 2 kickers, and there was a question about who was going to be the active kicker tonight. It is Riley Patterson for the Jets. $4,800 on DraftKings is a pretty cheap option. $5,200 for Kaimi Fairbairn, one of the better kickers in the league. He projects out a little bit ahead. He's the better of the two, in my opinion. But kickers tend to math out about the same. And if you can get Riley Patterson at a little bit of a discount, a little bit of a less ownership, there's definitely enough believability to the idea that the Jets are just going to kick four field goals and go about their business today. As far as defensively, the Jets have been pretty good. 6th ranked 4.2 yards per rush attempt allowed. 4th ranked 6.4 yards per pass attempt allowed. They've gained a 27.3% pressure rate against the quarterback on the season. 9.31% sack rate, represented by those 23 sacks they've got on the board. That ranks 4th overall in football. The one thing they haven't done well is intercept passes. Only 2 picks on the season. That secondary has been not problematic because they've been very good limiting yardage. But they haven't picked off many passes. They haven't created many scoring events for DFS. And it tends to be a lot of the big upside DFS scoring days where it becomes a difference maker comes from interceptions that turn into plays a lot of the time. Obviously, we'll take the pressure. Obviously, we'll take the sack rate. Both of these teams can get to the quarterback. So I think you take that. It pads scoring even if they're scoring against the defense. You get at least a couple points out of it in most cases. Overall, the Jets are allowing an 11th ranked 21.3 points per game, but they're only scoring 18.8 points per game because their offense, regardless of what they go out and buy for Aaron Rodgers to work with, it's been kind of bad so far this season. They've given up 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game, so it's a little bit break, don't bend, where they're not giving up much yardage, but once you get in close, you can kind of punch the ball in against them. And 0.8 passing touchdowns per game. So they've been better at defending the pass once we get in toward the end zone. For Houston's defense, they're allowing 4.7 yards per rush attempt. That ranks 24th. That should play well for Breece Hall, who projects just behind Joe Mixon. The 2 running backs are the top 2 projected players in this game. So 4.7 yards per rush attempt, definitely the biggest hole between these 2 defenses is right here. The 4.7 yards that the Texans are allowing on the ground. So if you're just looking to exploit a disadvantage, that's your spot. But everybody knows that. It's no secret. 6.1 yards per pass attempt, ranked 2nd overall. 28.9% pressure rate. They've come away with a 3rd ranked 9.93% sack rate. That's 27 on the season. And they actually picked the ball off. They have a 7th ranked 3.27% interception rate on the season. So a better scoring defense on that side. But 2 pretty stout defenses overall in terms of allowing scoring, allowing yardage. Houston's allowed 22.4 points per game. Just a little bit more than the Jets have allowed. And they've scored 23.5 points per game. So they're by far the better scoring team. Getting into the running backs, a little bit side by side between those 2 guys. Breece, it's been kind of disappointing. 3.9 yards per rush attempt. Just under 14 carries a game. He scored 3 times on the ground. You're getting way more out of Joe Mixon. For one thing, he's carried the ball 20 times a game. I mentioned just before, he's 25 exactly in each of the last 2. Had 30 carries back in week 1 before he got hurt. Just an absolute volume monster. 4.9 yards per rush attempt is very significant. He also gets targeted 4 times a game. So you're talking on average, just the average week for Joe Mixon, 24 potential touches. I haven't double checked it, but I would expect that that's the league lead for potential touches. Scored once in the passing game. Sees a negative ADOT. He's typically catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage and making something happen, but he's put up 5.8 yards per target on the season. He's a productive receiver, always has been. It's been a way to pad stats with him. He's always been a good PPR option at the running back position. Love Mixon at the top. He's just going to be crazy, crazy popular on the showdown slate. Everybody knows he's the best play. Tank has drawn 5.4 targets per game, but should probably see an uptick as the lead receiver now. 9,200. He's affordable on DraftKings. 12,000. Affordable on the FanDuel slate. He's scored twice. 9.5 yard ADOT. He gets up. He gets down the field. 18.61% of the air yards. And again, with more targeting, that's going to go up. Dalton Schultz also has a decent depth of target. 8.2 yard average depth of target is decent for a tight end. Sees nearly 5 targets a game, and another player will probably see a few more looks because he's one of their more reliable pass catchers. 15.6% of the air yards. Schultz has not scored this year. It's getting not concerning, more annoying than concerning. He's still only been targeted in the red zone the 2 times that we've been talking about for the last 4 weeks running. Has not been targeted in the red zone since week 4 and only twice all season. That's why he hasn't scored, but now that they're just shorthanded as far as who might be catching passes once we get inside the 20, I like his chances to find that first touchdown of the year. Showdowns play up the tight end position quite a bit. Scoring dependent for sure, but definitely some upside there. And could give you a not completely disappointing day if he's just catching passes up and down the field and putting up some yardage. He's been in the 40-plus range every single week this season. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Wrong column. I was looking at his snaps. I was like, damn, that's actually pretty decent. He's been in the 30 range most weeks. Dipped to 11 in week 3. That was the big outlier week. Had 16 yards on 3 catches in week 1. But not catching a ton of passes. Peaked at 4. He's caught 4 passes 3 different times. 3 passes twice. But it's been a little bit limiting. And actually, he's only been over 50 yards once. That was the most recent time. 4 catches on 6 targets, 52 yards. But again, hasn't been in the end zone. As we drop down the board, missing guy here, Steven Sims. I'll add him into the projections. I think he's going to be active. Hasn't played the last 2. But he'd be my lowest expectation receiver. I expect a little bit more for John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson. Not much more, of course. Mechie's drawn 1 target per game so far, but picked up 4 in their last game. Was targeted 4 times in that one, caught 3 passes for 29 yards. That was easily his biggest game of the season. He's played 5 games this season. Prior to that, he had caught 1 pass in 4 games for 7 yards on 1 target in 4 games. Not a ton of routes run, and last week he only ran 8 routes, but presumably that's going to pick up a little bit. Hutchinson has been running more routes. He ran 23 last week. He was targeted just once. He caught it for 19 yards. Week before, 15 routes, 1 target, 1 catch, 11 yards. 14, 2 targets, no catch. 27 routes, 3 targets, 2 catches, 31 yards back in week 5. That was his peak of the season. He hasn't caught a touchdown pass either. No Damian Pierce this week. So presumably Dare Ogunbowale steps into the direct backup role. Ogunbowale's only carried the ball 2.9 times per game for just 2.5 yards per rush attempt. You might see J.J. Taylor carry the ball a couple of times. Believe he's going to be active, but don't have much of a projection on him right now. Ogunbowale is typically more involved in the pass game. 2.3 targets per game. Slightly more involved. He does have a touchdown in that department. He's returned 8.6 yards per target on a 1.3 yard average depth. So when you do target him, when he comes away with the ball and he catches most of the times they target him, he can make something happen there a little bit out of the backfield. So maybe if you get the right red zone target, they're up on the 9-yard line. They target him 2 yards ahead of the line of scrimmage and he dances his way into the end zone. That's a believable play. What I don't think we're going to see is a big uptick to like 10 carries for Ogunbowale. Could be wrong, but it probably gets split like 2 here, 2 there, and then just Mixon carries the ball 25 to 30 times. I really don't see much volume for either one of these rushers. Robert Woods also on this team as a receiver. 1.2 targets a game so far, targeted twice last time out. Caught both of them for 18 yards. That tied his season high output. He had the exact same stat line in week 3. And he has 1 other catch all season, 5 all year. He didn't play week 6 or 7, but he did play all those other games. Hasn't exactly run a ton of routes. He ran 31 in week 4. Got targeted 3 times, caught 1 pass for 10 yards. Outside of that, he hasn't run more than 10 routes in any single week. Probably gets over 10 this week, but slips down the board by comparison. Limited projection, still 3,000, 7,000. Limited value, but on a showdown slate as like a scoring dependent play, 30% of the snaps is not nothing. You just like more of those to be actually involved where they're calling his number a little bit on the routes that he runs. Cade Stover, not much more than a backup tight end dart. He did see 3 targets last week, though. He caught 2 of them for 19 yards. Hasn't been in the end zone, but he's seen at least 1 target each of the last 5 games. So if we're looking for the second string tight end with a little bit of potential value on a showdown where 1 catch for a handful of yards maybe makes a difference at a very cheap price, Stover's at least going to get you that target. And then it just becomes a matter of where on the field was that target and what happened with it. He has not been targeted in the red zone. They've had problems looking for the tight end in the red zone, as we saw with Dalton Schultz. But it's not inconceivable that there's a little sliver of scoring potential there for a very cheap, very low-owned tight end who does get at least a target every week. On the Jets side, Breece Hall, I mentioned him before, but 3.9 yards per attempt is definitely disappointing. 3 touchdowns on the season, just 1.9 yards before, 2.0 yards after contact. He's been heavily targeted in the passing game. It's helped his scoring a little bit. 5.8 targets a game, coming away with 4.1 catches. Returning 6.9 yards per reception. That's not bad. On a 1.3 yard ADOT, so just out ahead of the line of scrimmage, just barely. It only amounts to 2.7% of the air yards, because obviously he's not getting out and running 40 yards down the field before they hit him. But definitely a very capable player who's likely to see around 18 to 20 touches. It's not a bad potential touch average, even though we're only getting like 14 carries because of that targeting. Last week, they do have a new receiver mix, of course. Last week, 3 targets. That was coming off of a 9-target week the week before, in which he caught 6 balls for 103 yards, again, as a running back. In week 6, he caught 5 of 6 for 56 yards. So there was a little bit of a dip in targets in week 8. Something to monitor for sure, just with more mouths to feed now with Devontae in the fold. Between Devontae and Garrett Wilson does still look like the slight number 1. 9 targets in week 7, 8 targets in week 8. 5 catches for 61, then 5 catches for 113. Devontae pulled 9 targets and then 6 targets. 3 catches for 30, 4 catches for 54. Hasn't been in the end zone. Neither player's been in the end zone the last 2 weeks. Wilson has 300-yard games on the season. He's got three receiving touchdowns. 35% of the air yards share so far. Devontae will catch up to some of that. 8.5-yard average depth of target on 8.4 targets overall per game for Devontae. 9.6-yard ADOT on 10.5 targets. Both of those guys will probably level off to pretty similar looking numbers in there with the Jets numbers. Either way, you're dealing with a pretty fair amount of targets. Consider, 7 to 9 targets as like a floor for both players. So a lot of volume going to go toward those guys. It does slightly become a matter of where the touchdown ball goes, or balls. Tyler Conklin drawing 4.8 targets per game. He's got 2 touchdowns on the board after the first couple weeks of the season. They really didn't look in his direction. 2 targets in weeks 1 and 2, and then went 6, 8, 9 in 3, 4, and 5 in weeks 3, 4, 5. But then has dipped again over the last 3 weeks. 3 targets, 4 targets, 4 targets. But he's put his 2 touchdowns on the board in the last 2 weeks. So they've called his number a little bit more in the red zone. He's gotten 4 red zone targets, 1 in each of the last 4 games. So again, if we're just looking for a cheap tight end touchdown, 56, 75 for Conklin, not a bad option. Mike Williams starts to get a little bit thin. No targets last week on 18 routes run over 33 snaps. 11 routes the week before, was targeted twice, caught 1 ball for 15 yards. He maxed out at 4 catches, 67 yards in week 4. Hasn't found the end zone with the Jets. Really just, low end season, and I think he's just gotten boxed out by quality. Or he's gotten boxed out by guys like Xavier Gibson, who caught the touchdown pass last week. 1 target over 4 routes. He caught one ball for 1 yard and a touchdown. That was a frustrating play if you had any Jets. Overall for the season, he's seeing less than a target a game, 0.9 per game. He was targeted 4 times back in week 4, and 1 time last week, and 2 times in week 3, and that's it for the season. That was his first target in 4 games, despite running 1 route apiece in weeks 5 and 7 and 10 routes in week 6. If you put Xavier Gipson in, know that you're dealing with an extremely thin play. He does get up and get down the field a little bit. 7.1 yard ADOT, 2.23% of the air yards on his limited targeting. But the much deeper target, if you're just looking for the Hail Mary, look for the one big scoring event catch, 14.6 yard ADOT for Mike Williams. Even on his limited targeting, 2.4 targets a game, it is still 12% of the team's air yards. So he does get way, way down the field. Again, Patterson, the kicker for the Jets today. Braylon Allen, just 26% of the snaps on average, 31% of the snaps last week. 6.1 carries a game overall. He's been in the end zone twice. Did score last week. He carried the ball 12 times last week. That was the most he's carried the ball since week 3. The volume isn't great, but he does have a touchdown in the receiving game as well, 1.8 targets a game. But you're really dealing with probably 6 or 7 potential touches most weeks. He had 3 the week before last, 5 the week before that, 7 the week before that. So 7 or fewer potential touches most weeks. 3.8 yards per carry overall for the season, yards per rush attempt. Not exactly dominant. Had a little flash early in the season where it looked like, all right, maybe they got something here. And kind of come back to earth on the limited touches. But if you gave him more, he might produce. Just don't expect it. Everybody down the board from there is a Davis, Irvin, Charles. You're talking about just low-end, sub-1 type projected guys. Jeremy Ruckert as the backup, the second-string tight end. He did draw 3 targets last week. He caught all 3 of them for 14 yards. Hasn't put up more than 15 yards or 3 catches all season. He's got 3 2-catch games and 1 3-catch game and 4 0-catch games. Again, it's a situation of just give me 3 catches and some yardage, like actually break one in 3 catches and 45 yards. Or give me 1 catch and a touchdown if you're going to play a guy like Rucker for the cheap price. But you're dealing with a very, very, very limited volume option. Jump into the chat, see what you guys are talking about. The Surgical is here. Haven't seen that name a lot. You new with this, Surgical? Good to see you. Light group here. 10, 12 people hanging out today. Usually we see better numbers for showdown slates, but that's all right. We'll just keep these things between us, We'll talk about the good plays, and the other people won't have them. If I build the winning lineup, maybe it'll only be chopped 10 ways. Let's see. Let's see if I screwed this board up today. I think I got it right because I had some time to put it together. The one thing I haven't actually checked was the player pool sizes, though. Let me do that real quick. Or the contest sizes. 52, 9, 10 on FanDuel, I think, is consistent. Yep. And then DraftKings. DraftKings went down the last couple of weeks. They were down at 98,000. They had been in the 130,000 entry range. 98,039 again. So, slightly smaller contest. All right. So, just for argument's sake, we'll take a Joe Mixon captain off the top just to see how ugly it gets. I'm going to try and differentiate it as much as I can just right out of the gate. 76 change left. Obviously, I can get anybody up here with that 10-5 left. That's going to juice the ownership, but just to see what happens. That's honestly pretty damn good. For 13 dupes with Brees and Mixon in it, Mixon captain. It's probably one of the lower owned Mixon captain versions that you could get. It spends all but $100. You get Rodgers with two of his less likely receivers. So, know specifically that you're building a low probability lineup, but it's one that won't be duped quite as many times. One deep touchdown pass to Mike Williams is probably all he's going to get the opportunity to do. And then Tyler Conklin, give me 4 or 5 catches up and down the field and find your way into the end zone. And these 3 players are basically home. Riley Patterson, I think, just slips under the radar. Not necessarily under the radar, but probably a little bit lower owned than if there had been a little bit more surety going into who was going to be the Jets kicker tonight earlier. And he's cheap. So $4,800, that works. That's effective. And then you get Brees Hall in it. You are tying up a lot with the Jets. And it's just straight line mixing up at the top from the Texans. If you wanted, you could do this. That's duped fewer times. I actually like this better. It's duped fewer times. It gives me some correlation between C.J. Stroud and Joe Mixon because of his significant involvement in the passing game. Same thing through the Jets group. Quite frankly, I kind of love that lineup. It's obviously, again, super scoring dependent on these 2 players. But for a showdown slate to get down under 10 dupes with Joe Mixon in the captain spot tonight, I didn't think I was going to be able to do that easily. If you want to look at it like a chalkier version of that, where we get a little bit more probability out of the Jets rather than just possibility. Let's go right back to the same setup. And then 63. 63 is a weird price point. There aren't a lot of super appealing $6,300 options on here. I'd love to have Dalton Schultz for $7. Conklin is a fit at 56. Fairbairn is maybe the move at 52 and leave some money on the table. Let's see what that looks like. It's 11. That's reasonable. I mean, we're chopping, but that's reasonable with probably some more probability behind it rather than possibility. Meh. That creeps up because Conklin's probably more owned than Williams is. Same setup overall, though, and then just slipping Xavier Hutchinson in there. 14 and change dupes. You could obviously differentiate super easily by going to like Robert Woods here. I'm sure that's, sub 10. So any of those darts is fine, just a lower salary, lower duplication. And, I think there's a slight edge to Xavier Hutchinson, but there's no real edge saying that he's definitely going to be the touchdown scorer over any of the other receiving options. Let's zero this out. Let's look at some quarterback spots. Let's go with Mr. Rodgers in the top spot there. Let's see if we can do a Rodgers with both of the top receivers. 57 should be easy enough. Give me Fairbairn. I mean, technically, you could go Joe Mixon still and then just take one of the, couple $100 players, but that doesn't look like a good approach with that group. If I was to do that, it would probably be JJ and just hope that there's a couple backup running back carries there and maybe he poaches one of the touchdowns from Mixon. But I don't feel like that's the best approach here. Hey, tank. Just take some scoring upside there. And then 27. 28 from Mechie would have been nice there. 2,000 for Ogunbowale isn't terrible. There are almost certainly a few touches in Ogunbowale for that price. And that takes us down under 10 dupes. You still have 700 to spend. We upgrade tank to anybody? Not really. It's just an ugly setup as far as the pricing goes with the missing pieces from Houston. So it's basically buy whatever you want kind of a week. But that's not completely terrible. I don't love the Ogunbowale play, but he's going to be low owned. And again, I do think there's a realistic 7 and change touches in there. I mean, that's just what he averages. So there's a realistic upside for 10. If he happens to score or just make a big play. If I take Mechie and then I move Fairbairn out and move Patterson in, that probably works. 13. If you go to Woods instead of Mechie, probably chops ownership a little bit. Yeah. Again, I do think that Mechie's the more realistic guy for a couple of targets and some more actual realistic involvement. Woods is more a dart, but it does lower our ownership a little bit with not a completely crazy differentiated projection. You're actually spending money to lower it because he's oddly a couple $100 more. Brees lineups would look a lot like the Mixon ones with his multiplier on. As always, we very much want to be playing quarterbacks, and we'll see what they look like in exposures in the sim results in a sec. But we very much want to be playing quarterbacks on these showdown slates, particularly on DraftKings. Lot of history saying that 1 in basically every lineup, 2 in a lot of lineups, pays the bills. 5,400 a piece. I've got Devontae, Aaron Rodgers, so let me give, let's go high-end passing game. Let's see what we can do. I don't completely hate the idea of doing something like that because we don't have them in the multiplier. We don't have the Texan combo in the multiplier spot. And if they only connect for, even if they have a 100-yard day but only connect for the 1 touchdown, Jets come away with some sacks, it balances out okay. I don't have the... And then we get 37 here. So you go like Mike Williams or somebody like that. Again, a total dart throw of a receiver. It still only takes us down to 10 dupes. If you went cheaper and threw like a Mechie into the mix, you're playing up against your defense and you're actually losing ground. You know what? If you did this... Then you could go either kicker or you could go to the Houston defense in there. And that kind of works. If you go double D. Sub 10 dupes getting both defenses against a passing combo from both teams is a strange build. But it kind of works. Or if you just wanted to go kicker, you get Patterson in there and I'm sure that, that cuts us below 10. Don't know if it does with Fairbairn. Yeah, just under. Some realistic builds there. Other way around with the Houston defense plays up the same way. Again, both these defenses, the only real hole is Houston stopping the run. That's been the only real hole for these defenses. Both of them get to the quarterback aggressively. Both of them defend the pass aggressively. So 47. Braylon Allen would be a sneaky way in. We haven't really touched on him all that much. But there is, as much as Ogunbowale might see a few touches, there are some touches available for Braylon Allen. He realistically sees a few a game. Not going to be owned very much at all, as told to us by that dupes number. Not a terrible approach there. 7:05. I'm going to have us out of here in another 10 minutes because I want to focus on basketball update for the 8 o'clock lock. And I got to build some lineups. Jim Parrish, I hope your day's going well too, pal. Making my lines, I can't decide to fade Stroud or not. Across multiple lineups, Jim, no, I wouldn't fade CJ Stroud. And we'll see the exposure in just a sec. If you're building one lineup and that's the decision point you want to kind of pivot your approach, your game theory around, then that's not a problem. But if you're building even like 2 lineups, he should probably be in one or the other. But if you're building more than like 3, he should definitely be in one of them. We're going to see some pretty significant exposure. But yeah, he is in a slightly diminished situation. He ended up playing the first, handful of weeks at a lower level than I expected, and then we've just chopped receiver upside away from him as the season's gone on. But definitely a disappointing year out of Stroud. Let me throw 2 quick FanDuel lineups together just for the hell of it, and then I'll pull up Ace Mine results, and then we'll punch out. Yeah, Hermit Money, it's Riley Patterson as Trey. Thank you, Trey, for answering that. You guys rock, by the way, for helping each other out in the chat. Friendliest chat in the world here. I know it's not the most active chat in the world either, but everybody here has been pretty cool to one another, and I appreciate that because it makes my life easy. I don't have to sit here and ban people for one. It's the last goddamn thing I want to be doing. Anyway, the most straight line approach obviously is going to be Joe Mixon. He's going to be ridiculously popular in the MVP spot, but we're going to see that he comes through in the sim in the MVP spot a ton. Let's see if we can just... Oops. That's not CJ Stroud. So you could go those 3, and now you're dealing with 7,700, but pricing gets pretty cheap pretty fast here. It's like double up my tight ends in the... Oh, wait. Does that work? That does, yeah. Double up my tight ends in the last spot there. 51 dupes, never mind. That's what happens when you go all chalky popular players in the first 3 spots. Let's see if there is a way to differentiate this outside of just like, padding guys in. The only way to do it, which I think would just be kind of cheating anyway and artificially bringing it down, would be the $6,000 Xavier Gibson dart. I guess Ruckert is kind of the same thing, but I like the target nature of Gibson a little bit better. Ruckert has seen a couple targets each of the last few weeks, though. So it will be one of those 2 guys. Just on spec, we'll do that. That does take you down below 10 with the Mixon, Rodgers, Stroud group there. You get the kicker on that side, and then you get the dart throw with Gibson. It's not completely terrible as FanDuel lineups go when you're using the 3 chalkiest players on the slate. Obviously, using the 3 chalkiest players on the slate, not typically the approach. So you go like Mixon, and then let's say Rodgers, Conklin. And now I got a ton of money to spend. I could go right to Tank. That's so easy because he just looks like the average salary there, but that would take us right back up the board as far as ownership cost goes. Patterson, probably not going to be that owned. Oh, does he not have ownership? Just give it a number. And then 14 grand here. Double kicker, leave a lot of money on the table to get my dupes down? No. It's like a game show on FanDuel. If you don't have the ownership numbers memorized, it's like, maybe this one. I do like the double tight end for the touchdowns with that, and then you're getting 15 to spend. Xavier Hutchinson, by the way, is 10,000. FanDuel caught that in time. Just curious. Honestly, to have that be below 20 dupes with that group of players, it's still a ton of dupes. This is not a very good lineup as far as maxing out your win potential. But the fact that that's not actually owned a little bit more is kind of interesting. Makes me want to see what happens if I do this. Devontae's cheap by comparison to Garrett Wilson, by the way. 10-5 versus 13-5. If you just do that, and then you got 10. Give me Fairbairn. Nah. Too many dupes. Defense? Nope. Yeah. Then we're just throwing darts again. As far as just trying to, how far down can we drive that ownership with the Mixon lineup? That was the only real interesting exercise on FanDuel, I think, was just putting Mixon up there and seeing what happens. Otherwise, you're just dealing with Mixon matching the top end plays, as usual. Let me pull up Ace Mind. 7-11. Got a couple minutes left in the show. Going to take a quick look at some sim results, and then I'm going to punch out so that I can get NBA updated. Is your board not legible? Ish. Squeeze that in a little bit. There we go. Hey, for the 15 of you who are here, some of you may or may not be new. There's a couple names in the chat that I didn't recognize. I almost said the wrong site. Rotoscouts.com. That's my site. Rotoscouts.com. If you haven't been there before, right now, since baseball ended last night, 3 sports going on. Football, every showdown slate, every main slate. Basketball, every single main slate. NHL, every single main slate. Full projections for basketball, for hockey, full projections for football, plus rankings, plus a super detailed 20,000-ish word player-by-player game notes column that I write that includes all your optimizer features, how to build your lineups with optimizer tools, recommended group settings. Throw all of that stuff out. Under $1 a day on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly plan gives you access to all 3 sports. Every single piece of content, every data point that I put out there, you have access to. Trying to make the best possible bang for your buck. Going to be padding things in there as the basketball season goes along. I promise you. We're going to build that up a little bit. So trying to put as much value on the board for you guys as I can. This site that we're looking at now, this is acemind.io. There are sim partners. Fantastic sim product. They've got an optimizer tool built in here as well. If you check them out, when you decide you're going to sign up, promo code RotoScouts, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month with those guys. And they're already at the lowest prices in the industry for tools like this. Significantly less expensive than some of the big companies out there. The ones who have been sold to private equity or are looking to sell themselves to private equity. It's going to be fun. We build this up over the next year or so with all the support that I'm getting from you guys. And then all of a sudden, some PE comes in, buys out the other place, and we're in a position where it's hey, Laffy, Engelman, what are you guys doing? Want to come work over here? There's no way in hell that happens. The PE thing might happen. That was the goal once upon a time. Don't know if it's still the goal. They've built a hell of a site over there. But it would be fun. So, DK results. Aaron Rodgers, 47% of our flex, 34% captain on DraftKings. Mr. Stroud, though, somebody asked, 59% flex, 12% owned in the captain. So, again, that is a strong do not fade indicator. A lot of value in the quarterback spot across every single showdown slate for the last 5 years. Quarterback, doubling them up, putting one in the captain spot has been the most common path to winning. You definitely want to have one of the quarterbacks in most of your lineups. And you can see there are past 2 good, solid W's. That top lineup, Rodgers, Stroud, Devontae, Garrett Wilson, 2 primo receivers to go with Rodgers, plus Mike Williams, the big dart throw, and then Mechie. It's going to be duped, but it's bringing back $460 on average. It's leaving $700 on the table. Rodgers and Hall with Stroud, Tank Dell, Mike Williams, John Mechie. A lot of work going around Mechie with some lower ownership. There's a Hutchinson one in here. Brees landed in 43% flex, but only 4% captain for Brees. Devontae, 45-4. Garrett Wilson, 23. More captaincy for Garrett Wilson, 13% captain. Might be our third most high. Probably not. Probably not behind Joe Mixon. No. We got more Garrett Wilson captain. So that's a big differentiator. We're getting way more of both quarterbacks in the captain role. Mixon only came up 5% in the captain, 47% across the flex spot. But he's bouncing off a little bit of extreme popularity in that role. So that's something to consider. Jets D's coming through pretty solid. 36% exposure in the flex. We even got 3% captain in our top 150. Scroll down, see what any of those look like. There's one. It's about halfway down. Jets, Mixon, Hall, Adams, Rodgers, Williams. So it's a Jets captain. Give him the running back. Work his way up and down on the big pile of carries that Mixon's definitely going to get. Take the running back from the other side as well and just chew up clock and feed the defense. And then Rodgers with Adams and a big dart throw. Not a terrible lineup. Texans D, 12% flex, but no captain for the Texans D. It's kind of interesting. Fairbairn, 13% flex, significant ownership. Got into 1% of the captains in the top 150. Again, Mechie is a big piece for the flex roll, 27%, but we even landed with some Mechie in the captain spot, which that surprises me. That's a lot of work, I think, going into the captain role here, just bouncing off of that Mixon ownership. Conklin, 27 with 1% in the captain. Wilson, we did. Devontae was 45 flex, 4% captain. So between the two big Jets receivers, we got more overall shares of Devontae, but they landed mostly in the flex, 45%, versus with Wilson, 23% in flex, but then 13% in the captain versus the 4% captain that we got from Devontae. EMAC 2024, yeah. EMAC I didn't say because EMAC I actually think would come here. I was going for the guys that I knew for sure wouldn't come here. I don't think Lofty actually even likes me. I think Josh did. I never got the impression that Lofty really liked me all that much. We never really did much together. I don't know why. I like him just fine. But yeah, I wanted to go with the guys that definitely were not going to come here no matter what happened. EMAC, I think we could sway. He's in a nice spot, though, where he is. So there's no reason for him to jump. But if that happened and they, clip people, I think at the very least he would come on and hang out with us. Scrolling down for some lineups for you guys. There's a couple more Patterson captain lineups over here. Those are kind of interesting. Patterson, Mixon, Hall, Stroud, Tank, Stover. Stover's the oddball there, obviously. That's the one spot that maybe you'd swap out for something else. This other one's probably better, even though it fell a little further down. Patterson, Mixon, Hall, Stroud, Schultz, and Braylon Allen. That one's probably got a little bit more probability on it. This one's more of a possibility. We do get some of these second banana tight ends, though. 5% Ruckert. Where the hell did... 5% Stover, 5% Ruckert, all in the flex. Williams landed in... Williams is another one. Holy shit. 39%. I was not expecting Mike Williams captain shares. Those are oddball lineups. That just tells you the power of a relatively sizable potential to create one big scoring event at low ownership and low cost. I don't know that those would be playable lineups. Let's say Williams, Mixon, Hall, Adams, Rodgers, Jets. That's pretty primo on the back end. So that's the purchasing power that he provides. But you are talking about that is a captain play that has one big play potential on it and not much else. So limit your expectations. But as far as a path toward, a big win, if it comes through, those are the kinds of plays that you want to be making to some degree. Mamba says Rodgers is going 27 to 35, 288 yards, and 2 TDs. Love it. Absolutely, Jim. 2 tight ends from different teams in one lineup? Sure thing. Yeah. I'd like to get correlation with one of the 2 quarterbacks. But yeah, I actually love doubling up the tight end. I have no issues with it. Tight end is my favorite way to build showdown lineups, honestly. It's won me a decent amount of money, and I think they, in a one-game setup, they tend to be lower owned than the wide receivers, unless you're dealing with a Kelsey, and in this game we don't really have that. Both these guys will have some popularity, but they're not going to be as highly owned as the primo wide receivers. So, yeah, definitely. And 2 tight ends especially, you do build in a little bit of, you might be limiting your targets artificially a little bit more, and they are a little bit more touchdown dependent by and large. But if you get them, you're nicely offset from a lot of other builds, so no issues with it at all. OMG Lulz nails it. Yeah, there's very little you can't play. And you're always gaining differentiation. Showdown slates, as I always say, a lot more about possibility than probability. You do want to always be playing with probability and considering probability. And if you can get to a high probability, high possibility, low owned, well-built lineup, then 2 thumbs up. Go play that lineup. But you do want to toy with possibility, and that's where the Williams shares come from. The one big play. Because if that connects, he catches a 40-yard bomb touchdown today on that crazy A-dot, you're off and running with that play. And you're differentiated from a large chunk of the field, and they don't have easy ability to catch back up. Trey's got a Wilson captain with Schultz and Conklin. I like the sound of that. Definitely a nice starting point. Anyway, a couple minutes overtime there from where I wanted to punch out. FanDuel, here are your lineups. This is your setup. Heavy Joe Mixon, but we do have the quarterbacks creeping through. This is the top 20. We do have the quarterbacks coming through, but it is a lot of Mixon in the MVP. I suspect it's almost exclusively Mixon and the quarterbacks. You'll see some, there's some Garrett Wilson, some Brees. It's differentiating out a little bit as we scroll down. But those top ones, Mixon and the QBs, straight line. A lot of the same players as far as the differentiation pieces. There's some Mechie in here. The tight ends are going to hit the board. There's Schultz and Conklin going through. And then some Robert Woods is a differentiation piece for a cheap price on FanDuel. Remember, we had that big price tag on Xavier Hutchinson on FanDuel, so he's probably just getting boxed out by price. But that could make him, if he's a price point that's frustrating both optimizers and hand builders, there's always a little bit of a case to be made for maybe he goes under-owned. So bear that in mind. Overall, 72% Rodgers across both spots, 67% Mixon. This is just FanDuel. It's going to be super straight line. 25% Jets defense. You can see that was 23% Conklin, 26% Schultz in there. Williams at 15, Mechie at 12 as differentiation pieces. Riley Patterson at 7 as the kicker, and then Fairbairn got into 20%. Both defenses were on that board. Ogunbowale, Braylon Allen as little differentiators in there. Some J.J. Taylor, some Jeremy Ruckert in there. Obviously no Stephon Diggs. If you're playing Stephon Diggs, that's a name you shouldn't play today. With that in mind, guys, here's what some of the downboard lineups look like. For those who want to slow down, pause, take some lineups. Again, just one sim's worth of results. One sim means 3 times through 50,000 iterations, so 150,000. But it's just one run. But you get a lot of results that'll look like this, especially on FanDuel. Straight line down the board. Anyway, 7:25. Let me go get basketball updated for the 8 o'clock lock, get some lineups built. Good luck out there tonight, guys. Go build some winning lineups. Somebody go win something. We'll see you tomorrow for basketball, football main slate, anything else that comes along. Adios.